Welcome you to this evening's session of the Town Center Community Conversations. I'm Lance Grensback. I serve as chair of the Planning Committee. Our moderator for this evening will be Betsy Krieger, who's also with the Planning Board. Just as a bit of background, I think those of you who've been attending before have seen this sequence of slides. We've set up a series of 6 conversations. We're now on the fourth one, right? The first two really looked at the markets downtown. The first one looked at the market for commercial retail activities, restaurants. The second one looked really at the market for cultural activities. And I think what we heard from the first session was that there's somewhere in the range of $350 or more million spent by Winchester residents on retail and restaurant services. The downtown businesses capture about a third of that, so the rest of it leaks away. It's spent elsewhere. And what the economic consultant told us was that if we were able to capture even a relatively small portion of what leaks away, we'd be able to sustain downtown businesses reasonably well. So one of the issues, what we heard on the cultural activities discussion was that we have a great number of cultural activities, music, arts, visual arts, theater, that operate in the downtown, some of them directly in the downtown, others in other areas. But I think we also heard that it was somewhat, you had to put a lot of work to arrange for performing spaces in the downtown. It wasn't organized. Marketing and getting information out to people was sort of each boat has floating on its own bottom. There was really no easy way to coordinate across. And there was a general sense that if we could figure out a way to coordinate some of those activities and better integrate them into the downtown, that we'd be able to draw more people in to the benefit of the restaurants and other shops, as well as the cultural activities. On the October 28th, we talked about the built environment. Mary McKenna sort of walked us through a look at the various elements of the downtown that make up the kind of urban fabric of the downtown. What works, what doesn't work, and we went back and looked a little bit at the history of the town, how it was built and how it worked. And one of the things that was quite clear was that we've lost a lot of second and third stories to fire, but the downtown was quite a bit denser at one point, and that's perhaps a model for what we could do in the future in terms of using retail on the first floor, office and housing space on the second floor, which would begin to generate people coming out in the evening and going to the restaurants and using the space. So this evening we go on to talk about the sort of the other side, built environment and the natural environment. What we're talking about when we talk about downtown, if we haven't figured that out, is roughly this area and the specifics of it. The archipelago area. What we're going to talk about tonight, and Betsy will lead through a more formal introduction of the speakers, but is a look at the history of the center, flooding, what we're doing with conservation, and then sort of talk about design elements, what we can do with the greenway and the open spaces to pull those together. What we're going to do in terms of just general process here is remind you that what we're looking for is people to identify the issues that are out there and the opportunities. Again, we're trying to walk around the whole of the town center looking at it from different facets and basically get a sense of what are the issues and opportunities, with the idea that we will eventually come back, perhaps earlier next year, and try to integrate all of those and say, where do we want to go? In particular, we were concerned about, what happens if we just let things go business as usual, what works, what doesn't, and then are there alternatives that we'd want to shape in terms of driving the downtown in a particular direction that would help the businesses, the town center, and everybody else. So that's the sort of thrust of this evening, is looking at where we might want to go and what alternatives are out there. And I think, as we've noted a couple times earlier, we're not making any decisions tonight. We're not spending any money. There isn't any tonight. So there's no critical path to sort of make a decision tonight on a particular approach or element. We're going to put these pieces together and come back and look at the whole set. So advertising, there is another meeting on December 9th. We'll look at transportation, access, and then on the December 16th meeting, we expect to have the parking study, the preliminary inventory done, utilization study done. We'll be reporting on that. So, Betsy?
There we go. Well, thank you everybody for coming. It should be an interesting evening of conversation. We have a number of speakers here. Ellen Knight is going to start us out with an overview of some of the history, particularly around the environmental elements that we're dealing with tonight. And then we've got Mike Toohill, here. He's very, very, very familiar with the flooding issues, particularly that we have in town, and we all know how the downtown area has been seriously impacted by that over the last, oh gosh, 12 years or so in particularly. So that should be interesting. Following that, we've got Jim Whitehead from the, he's obviously involved in town center planning with us, and also he's chairman of the Conservation Commission, and we all know that we have restrictions and so forth with respect to that. So as we refer to that as being a challenge on the challenge side of things. And then last but not least, we've got Julie Riemenscheider from Design Review, and she is going to be talking about open spaces, and she actually teaches a class related to the Aberjona, is currently doing that, and so she has some input from some of her students as well. So to kick it off, Ellen, let me see if I can get your pictures pulled up here.
Last few. You start there and kind of turn on the page.
Yep.
Brief technical pause. See it?
That one.
There it is.
There we go. There we go.
That's fine.
There we go. That's great.
Oh, there's Ellen. You were looking here at Mill Pond in the foreground, a footbridge where the Mount Vernon Street bridge is today, Judkins Pond behind it, then the railroad, and the point is the river has changed, or rather, it has been changed. Some of the first changes came through the building of dams. In this map from 1854, the only natural pond is Wedge Pond. The other ponding was created by dams. There used to be 2 mill ponds in the center. But today, there's only 1, because there is only 1 mill pond dam left. Landscape architect Herbert Kellaway thought that if the center dam were removed, that these might also disappear. But the town kept the dam and dealt with that water in another way. After the mills, factories and tanneries lined the river in Winchester, and there were even more in Woburn, which ruined the quality of the water, which led to a multi-stage river improvement program, which gave us much of the river landscape we have today. All of the programs included transportation improvements, river channel improvements, water quality improvements, and parks. The parks were a means of making the river a green path as well as a blue one through the town. But their first purpose was public health, to ensure that nothing that breathes filth would go right back next to the river after the area got fixed up. Now, focusing on the center, we'll look at 3 areas. In this map, we see the area below the center before the Parkway project. Walnut Street is at the top and is now Waterfield Road. In the middle, the river has 2 channels. The one to the right was the original channel, and the other one was cut by the railroad. Between the railroad and the river were a tannery, a coal yard, lumber yard, livery stable, railroad freight yard, 9 tenement houses, pig pens, and outhouses. Wow. To the right was a swamp of 6 acres filled with decaying vegetable matter and vermin, and with stagnant and slimy water covered with scum. Forrest Manchester called it a malarial swamp in every detail. So, through a collaborative effort of the Winchester Park Commission, Metropolitan Park Commission, and the City of Boston, the land was bought or donated, the buildings removed, the eastern channel was filled in, and the town had beautiful parkland, including the original Manchester Field, which is not the current Manchester Field. In the 1940s, sport impacted the river and park. in order to create a larger football field, the town decided to combine the parcels on either side of the river and parkway. And they did so by moving the river and the parkway parallel to the railroad, as you can see in the aerial photograph. So now, the river near Manchester Field is in a narrow, straight, man-made channel, and next to Ginfield, there is a more natural, winding channel. Next, the town turned its attention to Mill Pond. It did so without state involvement, but with the help of landscape architect Herbert Kellaway. Again, it had to buy property, including the pond, and the old Whitney Mill, which it tore down. It replaced the old Main Street Bridge, the Walnut Street Bridge, and the old dam with the concrete structures that we have today. Now here's another before picture looking toward Mount Vernon Street. One part of the plan not done was the replacement of the Mount Vernon Street Bridge with the new Art Bridge. However, in 1916, the transparent iron railing was replaced or covered with the concrete parapet that we have today. One reason this 1854 map looks more watery is these ponds. They look large, but the water was actually shallow, as can be seen in these 1922 photos. Kellaway said that the water had the consistency of black bean soup. And no wonder, considering that on the edges were dumps and a tannery. So from about 1917, the town began to fill in the upper Judkins Pond. In this aerial photograph, you can see where they started filling in. The particularly white part is the fill. And by the 1950s, when Skilling's Road was built, that whole part of the upper pond had been filled in and was Shore Road Park. Now, you see to the left of the railroad in the map and in the aerial that the river is still exposed or daylighted. In 1968, that section of the river was channeled underground in 3 large culverts. And the land at Shore Road Park was further compacted, so what we have now, instead of those flooded, ponded areas, and instead of areas where floodwaters can spread out, we have the high school and the high school field. So you can see in the aerial photograph to the right, at the top, the river is coming down from under Swanton. It disappears under the high school field, shows up again as Judkins Pond, goes down to Mill Pond, and then, as I said before, it travels next to the railroad on its way south. Now, where you see the high school field and the high school, the water may be unseen, but from time to time, not forgotten. And with a few historical pictures from the past 50 years, we can segue into what Mike has to say about flooding and flood mitigation. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And now we'll let Mike Toohill take the stage.
I don't know that I need to after that.
I know.
Basically explained
That's a good-
everything.
Good intro.
Stole a lot of the thunder anyway. So Mark Tukut asked me to come tonight and to do a couple things. One, to speak towards the downtown area and what's going on with flooding and where we are, where we're going with the flood mitigation program. And then second, just to kind of give everybody an update on the whole process that we've been going through for this. So I will run through some of these quickly. What I want to do is just kind of go through an overview of the issue, talk a little bit about watershed hydrology and what's going on with FEMA, which has a lot to do with what we're doing with the flood control mitigation program. The status of the projects, the status of the review process in the environmental agencies, and then I guess at the end we can do questions and answers. Okay. So we'll start with this. I'm going to combine these two just to shorten it up a bit for you. So why? Well, a lot of the pictures that Ellen showed you are the same pictures that we see here. Why is because we've got a huge problem with flooding, and we'll talk about why that's happened. Actually, Ellen's alluded to it in her presentation. So here's some statistics on the recent floods that we've had here just over the past 15 years or so. The one thing that strikes me every time I see this is if you look at the last column, if you will, in the end, in the past 15 years we had a 55-year event, a 55-year event, a 75-year event, and a 60-year event. And you don't have to be a statistician to know that that shouldn't be working that way. You're supposed to happen once every 55 years, not once every 5 years, the way that we've been having. So why is that? And we haven't had the big one yet, by the way. The 100-year flood is significantly larger than anything we've experienced, including the Mother's Day storm, the most recent memory. So why is that happening? Well, what's happened is the climate's getting wetter, for one. What we used to calculate as the 100-year rainfall event was somewhere between 6.5 to 7.5 inches in 24 hours. The new data indicates that it's more like 8.5 inches in 24 hours. So we're getting more water. The second thing is what Ellen was talking about is we've had a lot of development in the watershed. So the water's coming on faster. So we have more water coming off faster. And then the third thing, which Ellen also talked about, and I'll show you a couple other pictures about it, is we've monkeyed around with the watershed so much that in effect what we've done is we've shortened the length of the watershed from point A to point B. So we have more water coming at us faster in a shorter period of time. Okay, that can't be good. So starting in 1999, the town started looking at flood control projects along the Aberdeen River. And there were 17 projects. We've dropped a few of them since then because they turned out to be not very cost effective. But a lot of the projects still remain. So from down south of downtown, downstream of downtown, all the way up to the Woburn line, there are 17 projects strung out along the river. At the same time, FEMA, realizing that we've had a lot of issues with flooding, not just in Winchester, but a lot of communities, and that the current mapping did not reflect what we were seeing on the ground for flooding, decided to do a restudy of the mapping of the hydrology of the watershed and the hydraulics of the system.
When was this?
When was this?
Yeah.
The maps are still draft provisional right now. The modeling started about 6 years ago. It's been through peer review. The maps are out. Actually, the town's been commenting on the maps. They've not been formally adopted, but a lot of agencies, conservation might be.
December is when they're going to formalize them. They'll be effective in 2010, June 2010.
So FEMA doesn't look at things on a town-by-town basis anymore the way they used to. What they try to do is look at it on a watershed basis. And so the modeling, and now part of that is because of the capacity of our computer systems and models now to be able to handle those large, complex systems. It wasn't too many years ago where they couldn't, and you had to look at things one branch at a time and then put them together. So now they can look at the whole watershed and see how changes in one area affect other parts of the watershed. So this is the whole Mystic Aberdeen River watershed.
Mike, I think it's...
Go back?
If you go back one, I think it's important for everybody to see that there's two branches that meet here in Winchester, okay? And if you think about it in terms of the development that's occurred, think of what's happened along 128, which sort of runs right through here. Okay. And all that development that's happened up there and how that's impacted us. Okay, I think that's an important point.
Yep, and the timing on those two branches
Right.
becomes critically important too, and they come together just upstream of downtown.
Right.
So this is just a profile that's out of the study that shows you what happens as the water tries to go through each of these impediments to flow. And every one of these jumps that you see on here, on this graph, is generally a bridge. It's a bridge or a dam. At bridges and dams, water has a hard time getting through, so you don't get a nice constant slope. You get water backing up behind the bridge or dam, and then after it goes through it, you have this jump where it goes down in elevation. So this just kind of graphically shows you that stair step that's going on. So the 17 projects that we're talking about are each intended or individually intended to relieve some of these pinch points that are causing the water to back up. So here's a result of some of the recent FEMA mapping. What this shows you in the dark blue is what the old 100-year floodplain, it was 1978, 77, 78-ish modeling, what the old 100-year floodplain looked like, and the light blue is the current 100-year floodplain. The pink structures are structures that we know have had repetitive losses during floods. So all those floods I showed you, every one of these structures flooded during each of those floods. Well, they weren't in the old floodplain. So they knew something was wrong with the model because all the structures that are flooding are not in the floodplain. And a lot of the ones that flood are in, some of the ones that flood are in the downtown area, especially the high school. It's in the upper right-hand corner. Okay. So what can we do? Well, we can make the channel bigger. We can add more conveyance to it. And actually, as Ellen showed you, what we wound up doing over time is we've actually made the channel smaller instead of bigger. So we have more water coming at us faster in a smaller channel. That can't be good. We can use stormwater management. The town's been doing that. The town's been putting in infiltration systems. A lot of the new building codes in the town require that rooftop and driveway drainage be infiltrated. Infiltration of surface water into the ground slows down that discharge, and that's part of what we want to do. It also maintains base flow in the streams, which is really important for habitat. We can manage the floodplains. We can go in and we can artificially raise land, squish the floodplain in. We can floodproof structures. We can do lots of things to deal with the existing floodplain situation. Or we can better coordinate and use storage. And one of the projects that I'm going to talk about very briefly is Horn Pond. And in part what we're talking about is using storage in Horn Pond, using storage in mid-lakes in order to help relieve flooding. Just want to get through the status of the projects. The good news is some of the projects have been completed. So the Shore Road Bridge culvert's been put in, the dam below Leonard Pond's been removed. The Centerfall dams, there's actually 2 sluice gates on either side of the dam. One of the 2 has been replaced, the second one will be replaced. And there's been a bypass culvert at Cross Street Bridge been put in to relieve some of that loss across that structure and backwater that it causes. The challenges are, of course, money. In 1999, it was estimated that those 17 projects were going to cost something like $13 million. And so now, if you just look at inflation over time, we're probably in that $16 to $20 million range. It requires multi-community impact and cooperation. We can't just do things in Winchester and not look to see what effect it would have downstream especially. It also includes multi-agency cooperation. There's a lot of regulatory agencies that are very interested in this project, as they are in other flood control projects. And then the permitting process, the design and permitting process is rather lengthy. So what we've got underway right now is we've just completed a 25% design, preliminary design of Project 2. Project 2 starts at Waterfield Road and goes down to Bacon Street. And that's that section that Ellen showed a picture of with the granite blocks on the side. That's right below Waterfield Road, right across from Manchester Field. That channel is something like 24 feet wide. The original river channel was something like 38 feet wide through there. So we're working on a redesign, and we're trying to actually increase the size of the channel in that area. We did sediment investigations and soil investigations through that reach. As Ellen mentioned, there were canneries here. Canneries produce waste, which is still in the soil and sediment. So we have to be aware of what we're digging up when we go work in those channels. We conducted an evaluation and preliminary design of the dam at Horn Pond. The outlet structure up there is way too small for the size of the pond. So what winds up happening is they can't let the water out And so the water overtops the dam. So now the water comes down in an uncontrolled fashion. And what Jim was talking about, two branches come together, and the unfortunate part is when these two branches come together and the water goes over Horn Pond Dam in an uncontrolled fashion, it coincides with the peak flow that's in the Aberjona River. So you have peak flow hitting peak flow right outside of downtown. We did an evaluation of Craddock Locks, which is the Main Street Bridge down in Medford, because that's a constriction to flow, and if we let flow come out of Winchester and it hits that restriction down there, what does it do? It backs up behind that. And is that going to cause a problem in one of the communities downstream? That's a question that we looked at. The answer is, yeah, we have to make it open bigger. There's a way to do that. And then the DCR is actually reconstructing the Mid Lakes Dam so that they can actually have control. During the Mother's Day storm, they had to go out there and cut the stop logs out in order to be able to release water from Mid Lakes Dam to get it to Amelia Earhart where the pumps are, to pump it out into the harbor. Okay, that's you can do that once, and the logs are gone. So they're actually redesigning that whole structure. They're actually putting fishways in too for fish passage down there. That project's underway right now. That construction's underway. So where are we? We're in a process called the MEPA process, the Mass Environmental Policy Act process. And the MEPA process has several goals. One is to take a look at what are the alternatives to resolve the issues that you're facing. What are the impacts of those individual alternatives? Can we weigh one against another? And if there are impacts from an alternative, are there ways to mitigate those impacts, to offset the impacts? Another point is to kind of front-end the regulatory process, get all the agencies involved so that they see what's coming to them when the permits come. This isn't a permitting process. This is a open public review process, if you will, through MEPA. But the agencies get to see all the information, get to ask questions, get to ask us to do studies. And that way, when you get into the permitting process, a lot of the work has been done and a lot of the understanding of the project on the part of the agencies is already in hand. We obviously need to address the stakeholders' concerns, and the stakeholders are the people that get flooded, people in town, the downtown businesses, but it's also the DCR who owns some of the property. It's also the communities downstream and the communities upstream. These are all stakeholders in the process. And obviously to try to minimize the cost while protecting the environment and the neighbors. So part of the alternatives analysis is to look at financial feasibility of different projects. There's all kinds of things we look at in the EIR. I won't bore you with going through all that. But I do want to give you just a brief history of where we are and where we're going. There was an environmental notification form filed years ago. It's gone through the process. It was scoped for an environmental impact report. A couple of the projects that I showed you earlier were allowed to proceed before the impact report was completed. But now we can't proceed with anything further until we take the additional steps. And the additional steps were to do the environmental impact report, which is usually made up of two phases, a draft phase and a final phase. Well, we wound up having to do it in three phases, a draft, a supplemental draft, and a final, because there's such a concern from the downstream communities especially about what the potential impacts are. And we had the FEMA process going on at the same time, the models being created at the same time, which was very confusing. So we wound up in a three-step process. We've completed steps 1 and 2. To do step 3, we're doing some of the design I talked about, and we're getting ready to go into step 3. And we're hoping by February, this coming February 2010, that we'll have a final environmental impact report filed, and we'll be able to then get into final design and permitting for the individual projects and move some projects forward. So again, what we want to do is we want to take this situation where the light blue again is the floodplain that we project given the existing condition. And what we want to do is change it to what is the light blue here. So all of the yellow area here, if the projects go forward, would be a removal of those areas from the floodplain. And the light blue would be the floodplain that remains. So there is going to be some floodplain left. We can't take it all just down into the river. There are going to be some structures that are still in the floodplain. But what we're trying to do is to optimize the project's cost versus benefit so that we can remove the most number of structures, especially from the downtown area, which has gotten hit hard financially with flooding. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's all yours.
It's all me. Well, thank you, Betsy. And thanks to everybody for coming tonight. I'm here as Betsy said, representing the Winchester Conservation Commission. So we're a quasi-judicial body that basically has to enforce 3 laws: the Riverfront Protection Act, the Wetlands Protection Act, and the Winchester Wetlands Bylaw. And they're very complex regulations, and no way in the next few minutes can I possibly explain everything and all the nuances of these laws. But I'll try to give you a basic understanding of the important regulations and rules that govern any planning that we have to do downtown. The first thing one has to understand is that these rules establish certain buffer zones. There's a 20-foot no disturb zone that comes out of the Winchester Wetland Bylaw. So anything within 20 feet of the river, which basically is because the wetland, the river bank is defined as a wetland. The top of bank, in this case, for most of the river, although not all of the river, is considered the edge of the wetland, and therefore 20 feet inland from that is something we do not want to have any construction in, and that comes from the Winchester bylaw. There's a 100-foot buffer. A 100-foot buffer comes from both the Wetland Protection Act and the Riverfront Protection Act. Each of them have restrictions. Some of them overlap, some of them conflict. Interpreting them could be a challenge. I see Mike nodding his head. A 20-foot buffer, a 200-foot buffer is established by the Riverfront Protection Act, and you're allowed to do certain things between the 100 and 200-foot buffer that you're not allowed to do in the 100-foot buffer. And it has a lot to do with how you define whether the land is previously developed, and if you think about that as it's paved or there's a building on it, it's impervious surface, or undeveloped, which is pervious surface, grass, soil, perhaps even gravel. But those are the kind of definitions that you know, the DEP sees it black or white. It's developed or it's undeveloped. And in the Riverfront Protection Act, you are only allowed in certain areas to develop no more than 10% of that, impact no more than 10% of that area. So that is something that we have to be very careful with. It's the hospital expansion up on 620 Washington Street has been a big problem. It's in the floodplain, it's in the riverfront area, it's within the 100-foot buffer, it's within the 200-foot buffer, it's within the 20-foot buffer. So how, you know, all the problems that we've had but it was a site that was already developed. And so there are certain provisions within the act that allow you to do certain things when it's developed already, but only to a certain extent. And I couldn't begin to, I mean, it's taken us a year to deal with the hospital. We hope to resolve that soon, but we still aren't there yet. And my fellow commissioner, Mr. Khan here, is, you know, and I have been wrestling with this problem for over a year. So I can't begin to tell you how difficult it is to interpret these rules and regulations. Any project within the floodplain, and Mike has defined and showed you where the floodplain is, must not change the floodplain in any way. And there's a good reason, because if you change the floodplain, you therefore impact you make other things become a floodplain. So you have to compensate for any taking of floodplain on a foot by volume basis. So if you have between 30 and 31 feet, you take so much volume, you have to compensate for that by taking it somewhere else. Well, if you're planning for downtown, where do you take that? You know, there aren't a whole lot of places to take additional floodplain when the area is already largely developed. Also embodied in the Wetland Protection Act and its regulations are the Massachusetts Stormwater Management Standards. There are 10 of them. Each of them present their own challenges. standards, and let me describe each of those briefly. The first standard simply states that no new stormwater discharge can be sent to any river or wetland untreated. Well, you may not realize this, but a large percentage of the current stormwater drains in Winchester go into water bodies untreated. Okay. You go up along Wildwood and you'll see the decals that say this discharges to Winter Pond. Do not dump here, please. Don't dump anything in here. That's because there is, aside from a sump that collects sediment off the street, there is nothing that treats that water before it enters Winter Pond. When it enters Winter Pond, it overflows to the Aberjona River. Right, so there's water basically going untreated. Now, you can't do that. The town of Winchester, when it expanded Washington Street, had to put in stormwater management systems. So we put in a stormwater management system that collects sediment in a large tank under Washington Street. We had to do that, and this is why. Standard 2, this is the tough one. It says that post-development peak discharge rates from the property cannot exceed the pre-development peak discharge rates. So if you increase the impervious surface on a new development, any property, you put a roof, a parking lot, whatever, that increases the impervious surface, that increases the amount of runoff, the peak runoff. You must reduce that to whatever is before. In Lexington, that is, before any development. Here in Winchester and in statewide, that is just to bring it back to the way it was, the status quo ante. But that's a challenge. You take downtown, somebody wants to add an additional building downtown, put more roof up. How do they treat this? How do they handle the water? At the hospital, they ended up putting in a rather large tank underground that is capable of taking 200-year storms, back to back, and then infiltrating the water. And why did they have to do that? Because of Standard 3, which says that you requires a project to minimize or eliminate the annual recharge to groundwater, the loss of annual recharge to groundwater. So it's basically saying the groundwater is being recharged by rainwater infiltration, and you cannot take that away. You must maintain the groundwater. So here, again, using the hospital as an example, they have an infiltration system which is pumping water out of that tank into a system of sort of beehive-like structures that are above ground because the groundwater level is high. And this is another problem you're going to encounter in any development downtown. The groundwater level right next to the river is very high. Is that you have to maintain a certain distance above any infiltration system in the groundwater in order to permit it to work. So you now have a problem where you have to do this above ground rather than below ground, which is what you would do in a house with a dry well. Standard 4 requires that the management systems be designed to remove 80% of the average annual post-construction load of total suspended solids. That's pretty easy to meet. There's plenty of equipment out there available and so forth to do that, and you can do that in a series of trains. For example, you're allowed to count street sweeping or sweeping of your driveway, whatever, including in that thing. So it's a series of steps that taken together remove 80% of the total suspended solids, but that's a requirement. If you have then there's another requirement which says that if you are a land subject to higher potential pollutant loads. Now, you ask, what the hell is that? Well, what that is a fuel transfer station, a gas station, a parking lot that receives more than, say, 3,000 cars a day that's coming and going that would have drips and drains and dribbles. things of that sort where there might be chemical transfers. Now, we don't have a lot of those in Winchester. But if you are, you can see why they want this, because then you have to put in additional treatment standards for pollution. Why? Because, again, once you put it in the stormwater drain, there's no treatment for the biology or any chemicals that might be there between there and the river. Okay. Standard 6 limits discharges in certain areas, and this again is not pretty applicable to Winchester, it's easy to meet, in certain areas where there's drinking water sources, wells. We get our water from MDC, or from MWRA, and therefore, there aren't any drinking water wells in Winchester. So it really isn't a problem here. Standard 7's kind of an escape clause. The escape clause says that where there's a redevelopment project, and redevelopment is again, one of these definitions that you have to be very careful that you meet. But if you do meet that, then there are certain relief from these standards. And that particularly standard 2 and 3 and 4, which then say you have to meet those standards to the maximum extent practical. Now, what does that mean? That's something that the Conservation Commission, which the DEP has to decide, and which frankly become the reason for many appeals to DEP and on into the court system. But if you can, and again, downtown, if you were adding additional stories, and perhaps a slightly different elevation, the size of the building, you might classify as a redevelopment. So you can get certain relief. Standard 8 requires you have an erosion and sediment control. You've seen this, you see the hay bales and silt fences around all construction sites. That really is what that standard ends up requiring. Standard 9 requires a long-term operation and maintenance plan, and that plan be implemented. Again, if you're going to install these systems, you have to maintain and operate and maintain them. And Standard 10 prohibits illicit connections. Well, illicit connections, what are those? That's when the contractor who's digging a hole in the street comes out, finds a pipe, hooks up to it, and says, "Oh damn, that was the storm sewer, not the sanitary sewer." And now you've got a sanitary sewer hookup from your house hooked up to the storm sewer. He buries the pipe and says nobody will ever know about this, till it shows up in the MWRA analysis that they come out and sample your pipes, and then you have to go figure out who did what to whom. So those are the standards, and that's basically the rules that any project have to maintain, and that's our jurisdiction on the Conservation Commission. We have a real challenge, because interpreting these laws can sometimes mean an awful lot of research and interpretation, and also going back to DEP. So we would encourage anybody who has an issue to come to us early, because we have a way of going back to DEP and asking them to clarify certain points of regulation. They have a circuit, what they call a circuit rider who we deal with, who is our contact person at DEP to help answer questions like, how do you interpret this definition? Or if I do this instead of this, is this going to be okay? Are you going to live with this? And those kinds of questions, when we get into more detailed planning, certainly we would encourage that. Now, obviously, all is not gloom and doom, because there are many things that can be done to make it easier to live with these rules and regulations. And I'm not going to steal all of Julie's thunder, because I think we've discovered that I've actually led quite well into her presentation. But there's a lot of things that the town could do, such as establish a stormwater management district. This is a thing that has come into vogue in some areas of the country. Basically, it's a town taking on the responsibility for treating its stormwater and managing the stormwater as a whole, distributing the cost amongst the users of the stormwater system. And in doing so, it permits them to start doing distributed stormwater management, where you might take use of public spaces under streets. Cambridge is a good example of a community with a real problem. If you think about Cambridge, it's low. It also is right along the Charles River. Look at their stormwater system. It is largely about 50% flooded. About 50% of their stormwater system is flooded under normal conditions because of the river. It fluctuates with the Charles River and the Alewife Brook. So there really isn't a whole lot of push when stormwater falls in Cambridge. It's flat. It really is not a lot of movement. So any of the sediment and stuff that arrives in the sewer system just collects there. So they have a real problem. It costs them about $1 million to go through periodically and clean out their sewer system of sediment so that it has the capacity that it was designed to have. So a stormwater management utility, as it were, might help there. To take it, if we use some of our public spaces upstream, if you think about a project downtown, you might want to think about using some of the public spaces upstream of the stormwater sewer system. Perhaps ball fields or whatever, in heavy storms, let them flood. And then bring that down. Again, remember that peak flow requirement that I mentioned earlier. If you can shave that peak downtown, you could add a little extra flow at the beginning and perhaps do that, but only in the context of a utility. All right, so you think about making it, kind of a commonwealth type of environment. All right, but if you look at, I would like to refer everybody to Lexington and the DPW facility that they built over there, and some of the things that you can do. Here's a bottle of water that is being poured on the pavement over at Lexington. You can see it's about 2/3 empty. You can see the amount of water on the surface. That's porous pavement. That pavement is absorbing the water and allowing it to go into the soil. That's not stormwater runoff. Because water hits that soil, it's going in. This is a rain garden. Water comes down off the building across this tube, down this waterfall where it gets aerated to help treat it. And it flows into this rain garden where it infiltrates into the ground. That's why it's one of the first LEED certified buildings, DPW facilities in this state. This is the edge of the parking lot down at Pope John Paul Park. It's just a little, kind of zigzag shaped piece of concrete that's in there to help at the edge of the parking area. The water drains into that area and then it infiltrates into the ground. That's right on the Neponset River. Okay? You don't need a subsurface infiltration. You've got it right on the surface. We could do that downtown. There's talk about traffic calming downtown. We could put planters that absorb water from rooftop runoff. You could do green roofs. There's any number of ways you can do that. And with that, I'm going to be right into Jim.
More technical details than I think any of us would have.
Okay, so mine is kind of going to be the opposite of that. I'm a landscape architect, and I'm...
One little thing. Jim, the map that's been behind you the whole time you've been talking, could you please say what the red and green lines are?
I don't know.
In order to fit it, we cranked it over, so Jim will, I believe the red is the 100-foot buffer?
That's the 100-foot buffer, and then this is the green is the 200-foot
The
buffer.
town mandate's 25.
The town bylaw is 20 feet, no disturb, right? But the real you know, federal and state impacts are in the 100 and 200 foot buffer. So you
And
can
hatch
see
stuff
it's a
is-
significant chunk.
Is the 100-year flood.
I mean, this is Main Street, here's Mill Pond, so you can see how far up Main Street the 200 foot buffer comes.
We saw it.
We put,
In real life.
the planning board asked Beth Rudolph, the assistant town engineer, to put this together when we first started looking at the downtown. And it sort of took our breath away, and it goes back to Ellen's pictures. It's one of the reasons why we started to put these conversations together, because we thought this is slightly more complicated than we'd like it to be, so that's there. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was saying, I'm a landscape architect, and this semester I'm teaching a class, or co-teaching a class at the Boston Architectural College, and we kind of got the idea to teach this class because in planning and landscape architecture now, there are a number of award-winning projects that use natural processes to resolve environmental problems. And they cost a lot of money, and the projects we looked at as precedent studies are larger scale projects than the Aberjona in Winchester. But the idea is that natural systems are resilient, and they can regenerate themselves after environmental disasters like major flood events. So if you have a river and it's a natural riparian system, there's a floodplain, and during a flood event it floods, and then when the flood event is over it drains, and it really doesn't harm the environment or have a big impact on people's life. But that's sort of a pre-development circumstance. And over the long term, natural systems can be better and more cost effective at solving some of the environmental problems than these highly engineered solutions. So another thing about these sort of ideal projects is that they link the resolution of environmental issues like flooding or water quality improvements with other goals like open space and recreation development, sustainability, connecting neighborhoods, and education about the environment. So the natural systems created go beyond taking care of problems, and they create assets that can be used by the communities. So the Aberjona and the town have many of the same problems and provide some of the same opportunities. And the students in my class have done some analysis, and they're working on plans now. And hopefully we'll bring some of those plans to Winchester. But I wanted to talk about some of the opportunities that we've identified. And I think that it's more of a holistic approach, and so you're looking at solving the flooding issues, but you can also solve a lot of other environmental and social problems in the process. So one of the things, and this relates to the downtown in that there's a lot of town-owned open spaces along the river corridor, and you know, some of the designed ones that were designed by Kellaway in the downtown have a lot of historic value. But then other ones are, extend all the way out. But there's a real opportunity to connect these spaces and provide walkways, connections to the downtown for pedestrians. They can connect the town center with sports facilities, school sites, and neighborhoods. Okay, so, in improving the spaces around the river and the river, environmental and scenic improvements could reorient the community back towards the river. And the river was an essential to the history of the town and to the environment. So some of this, I'm just going to go through a quick list, but starting at the Woburn town line, there's the green space on Washington Street across from the proposed hospital site. There's Davison Park. There's the driveway from Cross Street to Leonard Pond. There's Leonard Pond, Morocco School, the transfer station, the high school, Judkins Pond, Hornbrook, Wedge Pond and the bike trail. There's the Mill Pond, the Mystic Valley Parkway and the commuter rail lot. There's Skinfield and Mystic Lakes. And currently in these spaces there are a number of proposed projects. There's they're planning a playground at Ginn Field, a splash park at Wedge Pond. There's construction at Manchester Field and possibly improvements at Skillings Field. And, you know, I think it's really important that when these projects are designed, that they be designed to promote flood mitigation. So some of the strategies I'll speak about more when I talk about the flood mitigation. But so there's all these like separate projects going on. It would be nice if they were kind of linked into some of the environmental goals of flood mitigation. I mean, I know this is talking about the downtown, but the flooding, the issue of flooding in the downtown isn't a separate issue from the issue of the entire river and the entire watershed. Okay, so that is the first opportunity of sort of connections. And then the second opportunity is to sort of look at a more holistic approach to flood mitigation and some of the things Jim was talking about. So I don't think the problem can really be solved just within the town boundaries because the watershed contributes so much to, and I don't know if there's any potential for creating some kind of a communication with the other communities and trying to control development in the watershed upstream, but that would be sort of a nice goal. So some strategies for reducing the volume of water at peak flow, they would reduce the amount of water and slow the rate of water before it reached the river. So I have kind of a list. And one of the things is the use of rain barrels, and I know there's a rain barrel program, and so each resident could stop some of the water from going directly into the storm drains. The construction of retention and detention areas, particularly over permeable soils and over aquifer recharge areas. The use of permeable pavements, and this is, I think, what Jim was talking about too, cutout of pavements and planting sections of pavements so they provide small retention areas. And there's projects that actually take parking spaces and do this in a parking, like every 10th parking space or something is sort of a little recharge area. Green roofs to provide flood storage. Limiting the construction of impermeable surfaces in all areas of the watershed, and working with other towns to promote similar goals throughout the watershed. So the last thing is, sort of the opportunity or the sort of the necessity to preserve the historic landscapes around the town center. And so, I'd really like to advocate for the preservation of the Callaway Plan. And it's important to recognize the landscape as a design feature that contributes to the beauty and the character of the downtown, the town center. And it kind of drives me crazy that these just like little projects everywhere that include pavements or other built features, they whittle away at the integrity of the green spaces, and I really would like to have the town have some review process or something that controls things that alter the Callaway Plan. Okay, and this is another thing that came out from the students, is that there are some, I think in the ENSA report, there's a few of the projects that deal with the bridges over the Aberjona, and I thought that it might be a unique opportunity to design the bridges to call attention to the river, and they could either be designed to reinforce the historic context, or they could be a more contemporary element, or some, it just seems like if we're going to be doing the bridges over, we
Rain barrels. I have a question about, gathering water from your rooftop or whatever. How does a well work, and is that a beneficial way of gathering water and then reusing it by watering your garden, for example?
A dry well or?
No, a well with,
Well, in fact, you're using infiltrated water, so you're kind of just recycling water locally, which has really kind of no net impact. What we're trying to do is encourage more infiltration into the water, into the ground throughout the watershed, because if you look at what's called a hydrograph of the river, basically it's how high does the river get over time, okay? In a nice pristine environment, a rainfall event occurs, okay, and you're starting at zero, whatever the base level of water is, and you see a kind of slow uptake and a slow downtake. Now develop that. Develop the land that is feeding the water into that river, and that peak starts to go up, okay? And the faster it goes up, or the more development you get, the more impervious surface you get upstream, the faster the water comes down and the bigger that peak becomes. That's what's happened to us. That's why Mike can show you that the flooding is much greater today than it was in prior years, and why we've had to redo the FEMA maps. And why is that? Think about it. Cummings Park. Look at all the roofs and the parking area up there. On the north side, off of Mishquam Road, up there is just an enormous amount of what used to be the headwaters of the Aberjona River. It's a swamp. You go up there now, there are cattails growing through the parking lot, through the asphalt, and some of those buildings up there. Our neighbors have not done a very good job of permitting projects. Maybe greed has won out, okay?
Yeah, we can't fool with Mother Nature.
You look at the development that has occurred up where the old Raytheon facility was in Burlington. Look it up there. That's the Horn Pond watershed, okay? That's all coming to us now. What's happened? Each of those peaks has gone like this, and where those peaks end up?
Right here.
Right here, okay? That's what Mike was talking about. So the more you infiltrate water upstream, the lower that peak is down here. Now, given the fact that we're delivered a fait accompli, right? That's happened. All our options is to move it through town faster, conveyance, which is what Mike and AECOM is trying to do for us. But then the folks downstream say, wait a minute, you're throwing this at us, and what are you going to do to us? And now that peak begins to move, that peak we're talking about begins to move down through the Mystic Lakes, begins to move down. Now what happens when the Alewife Brook starts to come out into the Mystic, and our peak is hitting at the same time as their peak is trying to get out. Now Cambridge and Arlington and Somerville are flooding. So, that's why the DEP is coming back to us and saying, take a look at the watershed. Okay. And that's what's happening here. So let us be mindful that we're not alone, and we have our problem. Our solution is probably to shove it downstream faster, but the people downstream don't want that to happen.
I wonder if we could just move this a bit back a little bit. I mean, we need to look, I agree completely with Julie that we need to be looking at this in overall in a very holistic kind of way, but if we're in terms of looking at our downtown, what are some of the things, Jim, that we might be able to redevelop potentially downtown and provide, more spaces for potential business development?
Well,
we know,
given the constraints, and you might go back to the buffer zone, it's like given the constraints of the buffer zone, you really are limited to going up. Because the minute you try, and what's missing here is the overlay of the floodplain.
It's on there, it's the hatch.
The hatch.
It's the hatch.
That's the hatch?
Yeah.
Well, you know, if it's in the floodplain, if it's in this hatched area, any volume that you try to go out in any direction, you know, you try to expand any building downtown in any direction, you're impacting the floodplain. And that means you have to compensate for that floodplain volume taking in some manner. Where do you get it?
So here's the question. So if I'm a developer in the downtown, either a private developer or the town developing its own buildings,
Right, or what would we want its own?
what solutions do I look for? Are there tax breaks or grants to?
Yeah, what can be done?
Where do I go to fix?
There's, from that rule, there is no,
Yeah,
Well, what could I do if I were?
you go up.
If I,
The
right,
only way
okay,
you can
so-
go up, you've got to stay in the same footprint and go up.
Exactly, so let's say I want to go up and I want to try and build some green structures, say on the roof.
Right, you would
To-
want to
to-
put
to a
a,
12
we would
lot.
want, you know, ideally you would put a green roof on that structure. The problem is if you're taking an existing structure and you're moving it up, will the walls support
Right.
the additional weight of a green roof? I mean, there is additional cost and obviously it retains water, so water has weight.
Weight.
Just fill a bucket with water and try to lift it, you know, it's not light. So those kinds of things you could do. Now, you know, some of the innovative things that have been done are to use planters on the street, to do some of these, you know, things like this along the curbs to infiltrate water. You know, here in Winchester, the building department wants you to do that. There have been sidewalk structures that have been built down in, forget the town in Maryland, but there's a town in Maryland that has built kind of like a little brick planter on the street, below of which there is a tank. What they do is stormwater comes down into the tank. It is pumped by a solar pump up into the top of this planter, where it goes down through some compost and gets treated, and then over time is released. The Stata building down at MIT, the famous building with no right angles, which leaks like a sieve, and the architect's being sued. But it does include a green roof. It does include a very innovative subterranean rain garden. It's a tank. Again, it's right next to the Charles River, so you can't infiltrate there. So you have to put a subterranean tank. It has a very attractive garden feature that feeds into this tank through a compost bed. Again, there's a solar pump that takes that water out of that tank, uses it for flushing in the building. Gray water. It then also recycles that water up through a system of compost. And, you know, there's a pipe that distributes the water. The water then flows back down through the compost into the tank, getting treated, and finally it gets discharged to the river. Those are kind of some of the innovative ideas that Julie is talking about that are being implemented around the country. I mean, it's the new paradigm in civil engineering and stormwater management. It's just very slow in coming.
Jim, we're looking at maps and pretending that the floodplain is two-dimensional, but it isn't.
It's three-dimensional.
Absolutely.
What, on average, is the height above downtown of a 100-year flood?
Well, let's go back to Mike's little peak drawing. It varies through town. You know, when you get up around the hospital, it's 29.8 NGVD. Down around town, it's more like 20. So there's a drop through town, and it continues to drop down into the Mystic Lakes. So that height varies over, you know, as it goes through town. But it also, you know.
So I'm thinking in terms of a new building being developed that would have to be up on stilts somehow. You know, is it 3 feet above the sidewalk or 10 feet?
Well,
or-
typically, you know, and that is certainly one
I know it
solution.
varies.
That certainly is one solution. And you see that, I mean, there's an example over in Peabody of that, where they build a building up on stilts for the first floor, the lower floor is parking. There's another condo up in Haverhill where they built, where you can actually build it up on stilts, and they have what they call blow-away panels, so that when there is a flood, those panels just get blown away, and it's permitted to flood, so you actually can build in the floodplain. Those kinds of things can be done, but typically they're done so that there's parking underneath,
Yeah.
so that, presumably people hear a flood's coming and they get their cars out of the way.
Come back on the
But that
16th,
does,
we'll talk about that.
but
That's the
that's,
solution to the.
but that is one solution that people have employed to deal with the floodplain problem. They basically get their building up out of the floodplain bond. You still, remember, have to compensate for all those pillars.
Yeah, but, the parking could be on checker block, which is permeable and all that. kind of
Absolutely,
stuff.
absolutely. All those solutions are wonderful solutions.
Mary?
I just have a question. We are a developed riverfront, or whether we're calling it a river or pond in the town, I know it's being disputed right now. And it is an industrial area, was an industrial area. So is there any opportunity to look into brownfield sources as a source of relief for the downtown? And also, if we do own all this town land that's adjacent to the river, isn't that opportunities to create new recharging areas that would help give some relief to the downtown for new building? If the town would work with the private building owners to do that?
Well, there's no question. I mean, at one point, I read just this morning, there were 47 tanneries in Woburn alone. All right?
I think, I looked this up for the class, and I think the entire Aberjona River is classified as a brownfield.
Right. But then the question
Actually,
becomes,
it's an impaired water body,
Impaired.
which is
Is that
different
different?
than a brown.
Okay.
right,
It's not a
It was,
brownfield.
well, it was on the list.
and it's impaired, and if you study the sediments in the river, basically every blue area that you see there, you'll find arsenic, chrome, because those were the...
So as part of the 25% design work that we did for Waterfield Road all the way down to Bacon Street, we sampled all the way across the river at several points in the depths of the river and all the way up to the dry banks, some 30 transects across the river, and did chemical analysis of all the sediment and all the soils, all up and down. And there are a few places, especially where you get down towards the, where the USGS gauging station is, up above the footbridge by Ginfield, and you get down by Bacon Street. The sediment's a little deeper there because that weir that the USGS gauge uses has caused a backwater effect, so the sediment's deeper there. So we have some dropout of material in those areas where we do see some elevated metals. They're not, it's not scary elevated metals.
No.
There's some elevated metals. But as you get closer into downtown towards Waterfield, we don't see that. Because the river was made narrow. And because the river was made narrow, the water pushes everything right through
Bottom's
there.
been scoured.
And so whatever was there is now in Upper Mystic Lake. So that's kind of the bottom line is, matter of fact, I worked on Manchester Field as well. And we had to do test pits. We did test pits in Manchester Field to try to characterize the soils in Manchester Field. We could actually find the old river. And you could find the old river by some of the hits that you found in metals, but also because of the material that they used for fill. They used an ash material for fill. So we could actually see that. We could find the river in Manchester Field. That's kind of the bad news. The good news is one of the reasons we were doing that is one of the things we're doing at Manchester Field as part of the redevelopment project is bringing in a fairly sizable stormwater infiltration system. I forget which way we're facing in this building, but the manhole that's in front of this building, in front, during heavy storms, that manhole will sometimes lift, and you'll have a standing wave coming out of there. Okay, all over town, because of the hill that comes down to here. That storm sewer goes under this building to try to get down to Manchester Field to get to the river. So it's backing up all the way through underneath here. So part of what we're trying to do is to relieve this, we call it the Main Street system. We're trying to relieve that system by putting in infiltration systems in Manchester Field, and also to try to bring some of the base flow back into the river. So the town did that in Davidson Park. So the town is using its green space for infiltration, and that's the goal. I know Beth and Bob's goal is to continue to use the green space towards that end.
Yeah, and the
Piece of the
infiltration was
river,
just...
just below the Bacon Street Bridge where it widens out,
Yeah.
why does it smell so bad?
Because there's a
There's
lot of
always sewage
accumulation,
smell.
well, partly because there's a sewer that
There's
runs
this
the
line
water.
that runs through there.
Part of
You know,
It smells.
There's an
It's not on the map here.
there's there is a sewer,
There's an infrastructure that was rebuilt, actually, for the MWRA.
right,
street
there's a
lighting.
sewer that runs right through here.
Right.
I mean, it
It's a
it
big
starts,
size
it
one.
starts up off Washington Street. There are 3 sewer lines that cross through Davidson Park, right? And they ultimately all end up down in here. And so when they get heavy loads, and some of them are combined sewer inputs, that is, they get both stormwater and sanitary sewage, so that when they get down, by the time they get down here, this sewer line is full. And you get the odor. It pushes the odor right out of any vent, whatever, so that's why it smells.
And the other reason down there is because it does widen out, and because you've now come through a restricted section and you're widening out. All of the organic material, in a water body is very light. So that's what's going to move. The rocks are going to move, the least, and the leaves are going to move the most. Well, it's the breakdown of the leaves that you smell. Rocks breaking down don't smell. Leaves breaking down do smell.
A lot of people
Okay.
eating leaves.
A lot of, yeah. So what's happened is it pushes it down there, it's very shallow, and now you've got a lot of oxygen. And so now that decay, that organic decay, you can kind of pick some of that up. But a lot of it's also the sewer. And down by Wedgmere Station, there's a big siphon chamber
Right.
for the MWRA.
And there's a lot of odor that comes out of that.
What's that?
Okay, so I had a great question about the odor, but, so, you're with the state agency?
No, I'm working
You're
for the town. I'm a
Okay,
contractor
got
for
it.
the town, consulting firm.
So you're working directly to advise the town on the, any flood mitigation, correct?
Correct.
So you're an engineering firm, so how do design issues get intertwined, or, so, I'll go back, Frederick Law Olmsted was a landscape architect. He was working on engineering issues, but there was design was always driving part of the,
Right.
the whole, the vision, and I don't see where the vision's coming from here. Sorry, but, tell me there's a vision. I'm not hearing it. And when you told me your MIPA priorities, and I didn't see anything that hit all the things you were trying to address, and I never saw anything that addressed this.
Oh, I didn't get into all the detail of design, but what's driving all the alternatives we're talking about are
Right.
different conceptual engineering designs.
Right, but I'm talking about aesthetics, recreational.
Oh, no, that all fits in too.
So where do you get that? Who's
Where-
on your staff, or I just want to know what the process is.
Me. Number one, I'm not an engineer. I'm a certified ecologist. That's my job on this team. Is part of what we're doing when we put the river back together, if you will, from Manchester down from Waterfield Road down to Manchester Road. We're going to reinstitute some meandering.
Yeah, I was
A
wondering about
low-course
that.
meandering
Yeah, good.
back inside
That
the
makes a
river.
lot of sense.
So the river's been taken and it's been narrowed down. And so the water, if you watch it, the water is still in that narrow channel. The water is still trying to move in a meandering pattern, but it really can't because it's restricted by granite blocks on each side.
Right.
So we want to take the granite. One of the concepts is to take the granite blocks off the Parkway side,
Right, right.
widen the river from 22 feet right now to something like 34 feet. But within that, build an 8-foot wide pilot channel that actually does follow the river meander and try to bring some of that meander back, and that'll help bring back fisheries too.
So how do you get input? We talk about stakeholders, but we have a design review committee, and we have certainly
We've been
a
doing it.
historical commission.
Well, we've had a number of forums in town. Matter of fact, in the auditorium here, we had them, and we had them at the high school. We had presentations. We've had them at town hall. The environmental impact report process is a public process. It's been advertised. It's on the town website. It's been in the libraries. People in town have certainly commented on it. I get to respond to the comments, so I can tell you we've had people in town comment on it. Agencies are involved. We meet with the DEP, we meet with the DCR, the Fish and Wildlife folks.
How about Winchester Recreation?
We've been meeting with conservation. With whom?
Winchester's Recreation Department?
No, not.
Because it seems to me that
We've had
that's part of-
presentations with the Historic Commission, we've had presentations with the Conservation Commission,
No, that I
Board of
believe, I'm sure you
Selectmen.
do. But I'm interested, I understand conservation
Yeah.
clearly is going to be addressed.
Yeah.
I just, I have, even I've read a lot of the Callaway material over time, and I know that he too is interested in recreational
Yep.
opportunities. And
Oh, we're
wondering
trying to
about-
integrate the bike path project into this project. Oh, it's a separate project, so we're making accommodations for having both projects because they go through the same narrow area, so we've got a plan for that. So that's part of the plan that we've been working on, actually with DCR. By Morocco School, what crosses the tracks, that becomes an issue. How do you get the bike path from one side to the other and get the flood control issues from one side to the other? We've got Public Archaeology Lab is working on this project with us. They're architectural historians and archaeologists. So it's not, Jim, you'll appreciate this. The engineers do drive the bus on design projects, but we have a whole team.
But they can.
They do.
don't have to.
They do. But we have a whole team of other people working with them. That's just the truth. I'm not an engineer, so I just,
That's
we
how
have,
it got kept the contract up. But anyway,
well, that's, you're right.
Yeah,
No,
Yeah.
yeah,
Downtown Winchester, although everyone complains about parking, is filled with large parking lots, some of them private, some of them public. Do we have an idea, has someone done an inventory of how much impermeable space or surface we have downtown, and what would happen if we turned it into permeable pavement, such as at the Lexington DPW? I mean, how permeable is the permeable pavement? If we turned all of this into permeable surfaces, how much would that help? And do we end up having the problem where we're starting to wash all of our, the toxic residue of our industrial past back into the water?
Yeah,
Well, we've
the
got-
parking
we've
lots
got
are
the
not
parking
actually
lots
pink,
here.
those are the,
In
I don't know that
there.
we have a actual total square footage of impervious surface, but to answer your question about pervious pavement, early on, there's been a learning curve on porous pavement. I think today, when Mass Highway first started using it, and there was a section of 128 in Weston, Lexington, through Lexington that was paved with porous pavement, they had some serious problems with the kind of striping that they used. You probably have seen the holes in the pavement where the pavement came up because of the deterioration of the striping that they used. There were a whole lot of issues that have gotten worked out. And I think by and large what we've learned is that if you have a very high intensity volume pavement area, a highway, you don't want to use porous pavement there. But if you get a light density area, like you would, for example, in the parking lot, you wouldn't want to put the main access part of the parking lot to be porous pavement. But the areas where cars park, yes. Now, why is that? Because the larger, heavy density areas get compacted over time. They also get a lot of grit off tires and sand that fill the pores and render it less pervious over time. But if you're off in the side where that is less dense and you don't get that compaction, you get much longer life of your porous pavement.
okay, that raises a question, an opportunity. You talked about a stormwater management district town-wide. Should we also be thinking about sort of the equivalent of a cap-and-trade program in the downtown? Or if I want to develop buildings, and I don't have a lot of space to infiltrate at the building, could I buy or use,
Space
some of the
elsewhere.
town parking lots? I mean, is there an opportunity to sort of cap and trade. I can't do it here, but I can buy space and infiltration in a porous parking lot.
DEP has talked about this,
And this is a
but,
mechanism that.
but as far as I know, they've never considered implementing it as a trade-off. But when you think about, that's where you get into this, where the advantage of the stormwater district becomes important. Because now you're approaching DEP not as an individual project with a trade-off over here, compensation over here, but you're approaching it within the entire, my district. You know, now DEP, this is a concept that DEP really hasn't dealt with
Well, but I
very
mean,
much.
The state has a smart growth program that says they want to concentrate development, you know, higher density development, higher buildings
Where there's
near
transportation.
train stations where people don't have to drive their car. I mean, shouldn't we be, I mean, maybe we should be thinking about
Maximizing
sort of a
it.
program that says, I want to look at the whole list of things that Julie has talked about, you've talked about, and look at them, so what can we do in the downtown area or a little larger area to sort of say, if I build here, can I, in effect, create more storage space or more infiltration space?
Well, I wish
You know,
I could say
on
that-
the Jenks parking lot or something
I
like
wish
that.
I could say that DEP moved at something other than glacial speed.
I'll take that back. It's a little faster than glacial, but not by much.
But not by much, and you know, that's, these concepts are being very slowly adopted, and the regulations, if you look at the regulations, in many cases, they impede some of this innovation that's going on, and the DEP is very much aware of some of the unintended consequences of what they've done. And one of the issues that has come up here in Winchester is, okay, we've got this 20-foot no disturb buffer along the river, but we're also encouraging, as a result, we have a lot of invasive species that have taken advantage of that and are out competing the species that we'd like to be there. You know, you go up and stand behind the Jenks Center and look around right now, and all you see are orange berries and bittersweet,
Yeah, purple.
right? And or you see purple loosestrife in the fall, or you see buckthorn. You know, you see Japanese knotweed, all of which have been transported up and down the river by you know, and taken root, where we say don't do anything with that. You know, and now we get into issues, and we have an issue that we're trying to resolve at the Conservation Commission, is to how do we deal with improving the vista of the river and getting rid of these invasives, living with the DEP's desire to keep a buffer and a vegetated buffer right along the river to prevent erosion and to do some of this stormwater treatment, because as water runs to the river, you'd like to have this vegetated buffer that treats it before it gets into the river, that stops that sediment, that ties it up, that has a biological film that does some treatment of the water to absorb some of the pollutants.
Can I ask a question? Can we move to the image that has a lot more green, the open space, both public and private lands?
There you go.
I'm just wondering, because I came tonight and you know, was talking about open space, and I feel like our discussion has been primarily about flood issues and the restrictions and the limits of doing anything in our downtown due to the flood restrictions, which is very important, and we've all dealt with it. And I wonder, just to, before the night ends, if we want to diversify our discussion and talk a little bit about the integration of open spaces with the downtown. We talk about having more. Where would we build? Would we give up some green spaces to build more? Do we need more downtown space, square footage? Or do we have enough? It's just that it's not being utilized. We talk about having second floor and third floor
How do we better
apartments and all that
utilize
sort of stuff. But right now we have some empty spaces, but that's probably because of the economy on the first floor. But maybe we have enough. And do we have the right balance now? Because our downtown is it's very different than a lot of other of our neighboring towns. It's got a lot more green space, in my opinion. It's very dense, yes, the whole town's dense, but it's got a lot more green space integrated into it. It's not like a dense downtown with green spaces around.
It's quite true. We've got
You know, all this, we have three schools. My kids happen to be able to walk to every school. I live near the downtown. We have 3 schools that can instantly adjacent in the downtown district, which is a rare thing. So that's an open space system. So I just want to know, I want to diversify the discussion
What do
tonight.
you think, Jay?
Well, I'm thinking, actually, I'm looking at that Converse Place project, which some people may know is being discussed as a redevelopment project.
Where's that? Go ahead, please. Go for it. Yeah, I know, this map of the orientation study.
Yeah.
this area right here,
Okay, yeah,
the elevator building that we all love.
oh, yeah.
There's discussion, the owner is
Right, right.
beginning the discussion with the town of redeveloping that. And right now, we have a green space across from the fire station, which is kind of
Used to be a church.
a simple,
Used to be a big church there.
yeah, it's just a simple lawn space, but that may change to be a building space with parking behind, or I'm not sure of all the systems. But,
Yeah.
so I want to know what people think about, the town common is an
Yeah,
integral
what do you
part.
think? What do you think?
Yeah, I know, you want me to say, okay, what do I
You're a
think?
landscape architect, you're a pro.
I think that we could do, again, I'm focusing on that project, but I think we could do more by densify. I think that the successful places downtown, to me, is the main street between the Mill Pond Bridge and the Rotary.
Right.
And it works because it's a very dense,
Right.
active area. Stores are right there, sidewalks. It's a very much of a downtown area. And that the parking, there's some parking there, but there's also kind of parking in the backgrounds. And then the green spaces kind of circle around it. And I think that works. And so I wouldn't want to pull out some of those buildings just to create green space. And I wonder if we talk about adding more dense areas, maybe we want to make more spaces like that section of Main Street. Is that what people want to see? Or do they want to see?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I mean, just looking at, thinking, would you be willing to trade,
Yeah, I was gonna say.
to allow some green space here?
I would put the building on Mount Vernon Street,
Yeah.
and I'd have the green space up against the river,
Yeah.
Yeah.
including parking.
Yeah,
But that would, that may be totally impractical, given that you're asking them to move an existing building, which is
True.
of substantial
Yeah.
height. So, maybe, given,
if we're living in a world of infinite possibilities.
Right.
Yes.
living in a world of infinite possibilities, yes, but given the practical realities of the status quo, maybe you just ask them to move you trade off land. You give them the parking space up toward Mount Vernon Street in trade-off for green space along the river.
I'm wondering, if Betsy, there was a developer who looked at that site. Do you remember what their analysis was?
They had not done a full analysis of the site. They wanted to keep the existing structure because it's a pre-existing non-conforming building. It doesn't comply with the building height and setbacks. There was discussion about putting some retail on Mount Vernon Street, and I think in the discussions that I had we had kind of staff discussions about it, in that it was felt that even though people really like the green lawn and on Mount Vernon Street, they felt that the green space would be more appropriate along the river, and people were willing to sacrifice the space on Mount Vernon Street for a green space along the river.
I have a completely, almost cost-free aesthetic project here in mind. It must have been 12 or 14 years ago, one of the first paintings I ever did of downtown Winchester was standing on Mystic Valley Parkway on the far side of the Mill Pond, looking across to the shops on Main Street and the white steeple reflected in the water. Jim Jones now owns the painting, and it was possible to paint that painting because there's the granite wall, a low wooden fence, and beautiful yews that were kept clipped.
Yeah.
And that has all gone to crap now.
Yeah.
It's all overgrown.
It's
all
severely
sumac and
Yeah.
it's unmaintained. And that was one of the postcard views of this town.
There's the MDC.
And we've lost it
Because
completely.
we lost the MDC.
Yeah, well, that was part of the 25% design,
No,
so
it's
those
in that-
considerations were.
Does our DPW have nothing to do with that?
Yeah.
Right,
additional
it's
landscaping on that.
it was the MDC.
Right.
And when Nick got rid of the MDC, he turned it into Mass Highway. So that, and I don't know where, now
Yeah,
we're
no,
what?
it's DCR.
DOT
It's
right now.
DCR.
Exactly.
It's DCR.
It's,
I mean, it's just a constant, we face
It's a
that in
constant
any number of venues in town, and not to mention the state, which just doesn't have any money for maintenance.
Right.
You go into the Wildwood Cemetery and you've got issues of
That's
problems there as well.
clipping bushes.
One at a time, please.
Well,
Drew, and then we'll get back.
that's a great discussion. I think it's a great point, and John's point is kind of, it's not that long a space that it should have been that expensive. Rather than want to look into that. So that's a good discussion to join with the
My,
selectmen.
yeah, my experience, excuse me, my experience working with DPW and Jay Gill is actually, they're looking,
They're pretty
they're
responsive.
very
positive,
responsive if
yeah.
someone comes with
Well,
a
if
plan
they
that
feel they
helps them
have
implement it.
jurisdiction, this is a.
That's the point.
It's cross-jurisdictional.
You think so, even
and
from the,
I know it is.
okay, all the way down to the water?
Oh,
Yeah,
no,
so
there's
we-
a line.
That's
It
where
is
we can get
ridiculous.
our selectmen, our
They're just trying
state
to get
rep
the
and
TCR.
senator involved and say, this is just something that's not serving anybody well. We have we have the motivation to do something about it, just let us. So, and I don't think it's that costly. My question was going to be, I think it might be to Mike, but just a little question and statement. I haven't yet heard, and I did step out for a couple minutes, I haven't yet heard anyone talk about the withdrawal of the Army Corps from the flood mitigation project, and I bring that up as, well, maybe perceived as a negative. Does that provide an opportunity to think about some of Julie's ideas about having it be rather than just the engineers driving the bus? Because I will point out, the engineers drove the bus to where we are today. I don't want them driving at the next step. And you know, and Julie's comments resonate with me about 7 or 8 years ago when I was on the finance committee. A lot of this flood mitigation stuff and the money, the large sums of money came up, and we looked at this, that this isn't coordinated. And I had thought of and I don't know if I like the idea now, but I thought at the time that it might make sense to have a Winchester Waterfields committee to oversee all this, to make sure it's coordinated, and through, I don't know, parliamentary running out of time, it never got voted on. But it just, now I'm hearing 8 years later and several millions of dollars, we're still not coordinated. And the Army Corps, I'm not sure I'm unhappy they withdrew. I don't realize there's money, it's a question of pays. But that was a question of engineering and no other consideration. It was just, let's make a channel. How big does it have to be? How wide? How deep? You know, I got interested in this topic as a citizen when I started learning, when we were talking about this and learning that the Fens was a flood mitigation project. So you can do something really nice, and I guess I'm going to say out loud, I really resent the idea that engineers are driving the bus, and I think we got to take this back and make something really interesting about it. Yeah, the engineering constraints, engineers just answer the question how. They are not capable of answering the question why.
Well, I think, to be fair, it seems a pretty good answer to show why, frankly, but,
Some may be able to.
you know, this, you know, if you're clearly, I mean, you know, if we want to continue to have a downtown to go to, you know, we're going to have to deal with some of the flooding issues, and it does call for some constraints. But I agree with you, there are certainly, I mean, I would hope that there would be ways that we can integrate that, because certainly when you look at the proximity of playing fields and so forth, they're connected in terms of the recreation and so forth. You know, right up there next to
Could we go back to the slide, though, that shows the properties impacted? Because I think there's something to be said there that supports his point
Right,
of view.
now, which one are you talking
The
about?
one where that showed, that Mike, in Mike's presentation, that shows the pink,
Oh, with the buildings?
Yeah.
the buildings.
Let's see. That should be, let's see. Yeah, this one. Let's see.
No, that's Ellen's.
That's Alan.
Those are maps, that's mine. Got closed out.
It's the third one.
Third one, okay. Ah, here we go. So we can just back that page up.
Yep.
Page up from there, excuse me.
While he's pulling that up.
That one?
I want to use,
That one?
I think it was the one before.
There's one with yellow and.
while
one
they're
that says
switching
this
that, I want
doesn't
to use
really-
Drew's comment. If you don't want one particular profession to drive a bus, you have to have a vision of what you want to do. And, you know, repeating the sort of mantra a couple of times, the purpose of these conversations is to go around, look at each of these problems, but the core responsibility we're all going to have to take is sometime earlier next year, we have to stitch these together and create a vision so that you can tell the engineers, the developers, the architects, the landscapers, the bankers, what you want to do, because by and large, unless you tell them, they're going to solve the problem their way as opposed to your way, which you haven't enunciated, so. That's the,
Is that the one?
This is the one, and I mean, if you look at the impact on the downtown, it's relatively minor in these floods. And, you know, but there were many more businesses on Main Street that were impacted, not by the floodwaters themselves,
Right,
but because water backed up through their drains.
exactly right.
And there's some very simple fixes for that, you know, in terms of going down and simply putting a valve on your drain. That when you get a storm event, you go down and you shut the valve. That's a fairly low-cost thing that the town could even perhaps support. Or look at its sewer system that's backing up and put some sort of a check valve or a valve in that system that would limit the amount of backflow in that system. That might be a cheaper fix than a whole lot of channel. You know, given what's impacted. Now, I recognize the high school's been impacted, but maybe you build a berm around the high school. Maybe you simply build a berm around the high school and do these other things, and you get away for a hell of a lot cheaper and a hell of a lot less environmental impact. That would just, I'm off my soapbox.
Steve, I'm just going to get a few different people.
I think, I mean, the flooding's a problem, but even if there were no flooding here ever, there's a problem with the downtown. And I think we really should stop worrying about the flooding. Maybe the engineers should worry about the flooding, but let's think about what we're trying to accomplish with the downtown. I grew up in Cambridge, and Harvard Square was a destination. You would go to Harvard Square to go to Harvard Square. It didn't have anything like the natural, you know, attractions that Winchester Center could have, does have, although they're not all that accessible. But you went there because there was ice cream, bookstores, movie theaters, you name it, you know, coffee shops, restaurants.
Good greasy burgers.
And just to distinguish my own experience, I live a long way from Winchester Center. But when I go to Winchester Center, I go there for a particular purpose. It's the post office, it's a particular restaurant, it's Stop and Shop, it's CVS. I go there for usually just one purpose. Go in, park, there's always enough parking, you know, do my errand, and get out, which is a completely different mode of operation. When I lived in Harvard, actually I lived further from Harvard Square than I lived from Winchester Center. And I think that's emblematic of the problem that Winchester Center is suffering from. Most of the residents of Winchester don't spend much time or much money in Winchester Center, which, you know, leads to the chicken and egg problem. The businesses don't really want to be there because there isn't enough traffic. And so the challenge is, how do you make the center attractive to a larger cross-section of the residents? Young people I don't think are well addressed. Somebody mentioned in the last meeting, you know, it'd be nice to have a footbridge that you could get from the Jenks Center parking lot over to the other side. How you get through the wall that is represented by the railroad. How do you make it a usable destination rather than a place that you just go and get a particular task
Make it more of a destination spot.
That's right. And,
in and of itself,
that comes back to what vision, what do we want it to be? And then how do we get there? Getting there will be hard, but at this point in these conversations, we haven't really nailed down even alternatives for what it ought to be. And I see it as very hard to go to the next step until we have that.
Yeah, well, I think we've been starting to get there. I think one of the things...
That was last week.
Well, one of the things I think that has been interesting, that has come up, is just the whole notion, and actually sort of how we sit in our overall green backyard, if you will, you know, has something to do with that. If you think about a lot of the cultural activities that we were talking about is sort of the downtown is sort of the hub, with the spokes going out. In many ways, for example, we've got the Fells, you know, we've got a lot of people that go to the Fells. How do we bring them into the downtown? You know, not to mention, of course, just the people who live here in Winchester, but what are the sorts of things that we can foster to make it an interesting spot to be going throughout the week, throughout the day, on weekends?
I think
your
Lance's
point's well
comment is
taken.
well taken. I'm thinking, I heard it as the answer to the question that was yet to be asked, which is, once we get done with the 6 topical conversations, we should have enough information to think about it and then have a all-encompassing, integrative discussion.
Yeah, that might be one.
Led
A
discussion.
good one.
The original impetus, Steve, was for the conversations, was the sense that, well, we had a parking problem, why don't we just go out and build a parking garage? Well, where do you build it? Oops, there's a MWRA sewer underneath it. Well, how about if we move it up? Nope, that's green space. And so, there was a really distinct sense as we listened to people that we didn't understand all the sides of this. And so, although it's a little frustrating to be walking around on each of these topics, I think that at least my personal opinion is that I've learned a whole lot more about the downtown than I ever knew, and I've lived here, my entire life and been downtown for trips for, my entire life. And, you sit and say, I never realized how the sewers work with the downtown or how that might constrain development. So at some point, we've got to look at transportation and parking be the last two, but at some point, very definitely, I would urge people to sort of, when you go home and sitting there sort of noodling on your papers at night, I would say, start putting down ideas about what you think would work as you pull this mix of things together. Because if we don't go to that point of, pulling these things together, looking at vision and alternative visions for it, then we'll never get to the kind of solution that works for everybody. So it's, and I would, if you've got a vision hidden in your head right now, just blurt it out, because we'll all start thinking about it.
And I'll start
These are the
thinking
start.
about it. Susan?
Yes. Jim's image of the peaks moving down the watershed toward the towns that are beyond us. What are the processes and who are the bodies that are going to look at how the impacts on different towns and the objectives of different towns play out in what we do and presumably what other people do?
Well, that's really what the MEPA process is all about, Susan. And that's where the MEPA reports and the modeling that they're doing at AECOM and at Canico are going to bring into the picture. And once that modeling is done, it becomes again a public document. Once that final report's issued, it will be commented on. There will be public meetings, and I can assure you that there are people downstream who are watching with interested eyes.
Well, we've also been working with them and meeting with them. I mean, we've had repeated meetings with Mystic River Valley Watershed Association, with the ABC community groups, Representative Brownsberger, the folks from Cambridge DPW, folks from Arlington, working very close with upstream folks, working with Jay up in Woburn very closely on issues, and then DCR, because DCR regulates the Amelia Earhart Dam and the Mid Lakes Dam, so they control how the water moves through the system. So we've actually, that was part of the criticism of the early work where the engineers were strictly just driving the bus, because they were looking just at what they can do to get the water out of Winchester to reduce the flooding in Winchester. And they were forced to take...
That's not the only consideration.
Right, and they were forced to take a more holistic view, and that more holistic view includes the Kellaway landscape. It includes the bike paths. It includes, I'm going to be doing, hopefully, repairing restoration design work. I mean, it includes all of those elements as part of the larger flood control project.
So it won't do injustice downstream. I mean, there are real bodies and real processes. Okay.
There's a process. Can you remember, February 2010 is when the final EIR is going to be submitted or drafted?
Submitted.
Submitted. And that goes through a review and comment period, which is
45 days.
Which, if you're waiting, if you have new comments to make at that point, there's only been 3 other bites at the apple. They're less likely to make an impact, but they're weighing that in. I'm glad you mentioned the point about the original focus of the project was getting the water out of Winchester as fast as possible, because I was going to point that out as a design blind spot, and so now I don't have to because you did. But there's other, I will make a comment, there's still, and this came up, a couple people, Julie and somebody else brought up, getting the water out of Winchester is one half, but just like the truck that's stuck under the bridge, you don't have to lift the bridge, you could take the air out of the tires. The upstream watershed management has been unaddressed. I do know from a former selectman claims that there's supposed to be some agreements that have never been enforced with the upstream towns. It'd be great to look at those, see if that goes in. I don't know yet the process. I appreciate that your firm is kind of in the middle trying to integrate a bunch of disparate bodies. That slide you had there about, what is it, differing bodies, differing agencies, I felt your pain.
Permitting is not an easy
But I'm going to
thing.
throw one more, I'm going to throw a new thought in that I haven't heard yet, and I don't know if it directly handshakes with this, but it does interface. The EPA is leading a multi-agency initiative to clean up the lower Mystic River, like the Charles River cleanup of many decades ago, I guess at this point, but a decade-long project to make it be more just cleaned up, better accessible, better resource to the community. This obviously, the Upper Joan is the upper Mystic River. Let's be clear. And there's going to be an interface. I don't think there's a direct interface, but I know with that kind of attention, what did you call the river? It's not a brownfield. It's
impaired.
Impaired. It's impaired. Well, we're all kind of impaired at times. But it would seem that there may be some opportunity to get some attention there, and consistent with our flood mitigation objectives, to get some of that impairment reduced. And I don't know how that's going to be addressed, or what's going on there. Does anyone, do you know?
I know that there's working groups now forming for the Lower Mystic. I'm on the email chain. Jim and I have been to a number of meetings with folks from Lower Mystic.
Within the next 2 weeks, as I recall.
Yeah, there's a meeting coming up. There's also a grant program that's specifically aimed for communities in the Lower Mystic.
I would point out, one of the things that we have been doing, and Mike has been involved, the Conservation Commission has taken the lead in trying to apply for a grant under the National Wetlands Conservation Act, we call it NACA, North American Wetlands Conservation Act, that received money from ExxonMobil, 7.6 million, I believe it was,
Because of the spill.
because of a spill down in Chelsea Creek that was to be spent in the Mystic River watershed. And we identified that money and said, let's go get some for Winchester. And so we submitted an application last year for dredging Davidson Park and doing some ecological restoration up in Davidson Park to help both alleviate the flooding in that vicinity, but also, although that was not really a flood control project, it was more to say, okay, let's enhance the environment up there. Now, we got rejected because people saw it as A, flood control project, and B, a grass mowed park. And but they gave us the opportunity to resubmit, which we're in the process of trying to do. And we think that because we just had them here a month ago looking at and spent a day with them walking up through Davidson Park in that area and explain what we were trying to do, they now understand the project much better, and we actually had the people who are going to review our proposal the next time, so they've told us how to write the proposal, which is very good.
That, and they're used to dealing with projects that are,
Significant budget.
restore 1,000 acres of prairie potholes in North Dakota. And we looked at, 7 acres of restoration in Davidson Park, and they're like 7 acres for $1 million. I could do 1,000 acres in Louisiana for $1 million, but I can only do 7 acres in Massachusetts. So, and these folks are from all over the country, and they really do look at it that way.
Right. And we had people from Illinois, from New Mexico, from
Arkansas.
Here. So it was a totally different perspective. And I think after they walked with us, they first had doubts about the project, but at the end they came back and said, yeah, we understand what you're trying to do here, which is good. So we're in the process of resubmitting. We got to get that in by.
Well, I'm looking at the clock, And times are starting to run, so it's like maybe two more questions and that's it, and then I'm gonna give it to Lance to wrap up. Yep.
Yeah, Betsy, I'd like to express my thoughts on the center, if I might. First, I think you have to take the integrated approach that you're doing. You know, you've addressed the flood mitigation, which will take several years to resolve, obviously. You're addressing the parking, which is the next step, which is vital to the center. And in time, you will look at the zoning, which will be the outgrowth of all these conversations. But if you look at the population of the town, which is what, 22,000, I mean, I question, and there's been some discussion about expansion of the retail area. And my own opinion is that the population of the town would not support a retail area that is larger in square footage than we currently have. The thing to do, I guess, might be to increase the sales per square foot, if you will, which you would do in, I think, increased restaurant usage and licenses and so on. But the key to it, I really believe, would be a denser residential downtown, because that would support the businesses that are there, and the restaurants, and the services, and the transportation hub, and all the rest of it. So, I mean, I think of the area in back of the fire station, for example. At some point in time, that would be a prime residential development. I think in terms of what Jim has said about expanding the footprint in the floodplain, that consider adding a story to some of the downtown buildings to create additional residential use, begging the parking question for the moment. Or you take the Mill Pond building as well, and that's what made me think of some of this, instead of expanding the retail there, consider some luxury residential. I really don't see that as a need for an expanded retail use in that location. So I think the driver for the center, I think, is residential density. Then you will increase the dollars of sales per square foot.
More people.
That the center needs badly to make it profitable.
And I also think that increasing the residential, then you really have to look at the open space and connections and promoting pedestrian use, because you don't want all those people to have cars in the downtown. You want them to...
No, that's all part of it. I mean, the center is still would be attractive, and I think there's a market for residential, expanded residential use in the center. You've got the open space, you've got the attractions, it's a good fit, I believe.
Yeah, I think it very well could be, and that, of course, leads us right into smart growth and transportation, and that's where we're...
That's right.
Two things before we leave tonight. First, thank Betsy and the panelists for putting up with us for the whole evening. Good show. So, quick advertising. The next one we're going to talk about transportation is everything but parking. So we're going to talk about highway access, pedestrian access, bike. I want to volunteer.
But you just can't
to
stop
do that.
We're
Also going to look at basically how people get into and out of the center on the 9th, and then we hope to have the completed parking inventory and survey use to report to you by the 16th. So at that point, all the pieces will be there together. The last point, so the next December 9th will be held here. December 16th will be in the auditorium here, so because we're expecting a large overflow cloud of mad people who want to park right there. The last point I want to do is to basically pick up on Steve's comment earlier and what Steve Parkhurst was all saying. Begin to think about your homework assignment, which is how do you glue these pieces together to make sense of what you want to do. I haven't written this down, so it's not thoroughly organized at this point, but if you listen to what we heard in the first session on the retail market out there is there's a very substantial purchasing power right in Winchester and very closely located. And the question is, not only are we, but I think I heard from Peg Barringer that we don't really have the right mix of clusters of businesses to attract people down to do more than one thing. So there's a problem of how, what is that mix and how do we market to businesses, attract them and bring them into the downtown so we generate that mix to do it. And there's clearly also a market, I think Steve correctly, for housing in the downtown, which would reinforce that piece there. We also heard from Peg that unless we maintain that first floor retail visual element of the design, that we're not going to get people there. And the cultural activities, I think we heard from John and a bunch of other people, we've got a real mass of cultural facilities, activities down there. But again, and it's not sort of the lack of those, I think one of the things that I heard again was sort of the institutional problem, coordination, which is that there's no real way to glue that together to really make an impact. So very much like business, marketing, and retention, how do you do the cultural organization, and do you fit those two together so that when you come down for an opening at the gallery, you know, or do you go out to dinner, and, you know, is there a frequent flyer buyer program that makes it easy to do, you know, but what's in that organization? What we heard on the built environment was that, you know, there's a lot of space that burned in Winchester that's in the second and third stories, but when you look at the zoning, when you look at the sort of elevator requirements, a whole series of things, it's not necessarily easy to use if you're a developer, not easy to use that space today. So what do we need to do, you know, what does that built environment look like, and then how do we make it possible for the developer to come back and do it in less than a 10-year process and things like that. So there's a lot of, and there's a physical design element to that we really don't understand yet, but it's quite effective. I think we heard tonight that, you know, the flooding and those issues are going to constrain us, but again, I keep hearing an institutional issue there. Is there a stormwater district? Is there an opportunity to do a cap and trade program? So if I want to expand my building both up and outward, you know, I don't have to do my entire stormwater management right on that building. I can do it in the Jenks parking lot, or I can do it someplace else. You know, is there the town, should the town be looking for monies like Jim's, you know, hit up the Exxon stuff, you know, that can facilitate that so that the developer who's putting in space for housing and retail doesn't have to take the entire hit, you know, on a lower margin to make that feasible. And again, there's a whole set of these, and I think when we look at transportation and parking, we're going to find another nice little set of problems there, part of which are, again, organizational, but part of them come back to just a vision. You know, what is it you want to do, and how do you fit these pieces together? So your homework assignment is to take all those possibilities and begin to come back in the next meetings and start to sort of feed us. I think the planning board started this series, and the Board of Selectmen, Tom Howley, what we're betting on in the end is that we got enough smart people who are familiar with all the aspects of this thing, that out of the discussion will emerge a useful solution, and it's all for free except for your evening time here. So, and then we'll have to figure out, then we'll have to get an engineer to figure out how to build it, and an architect to do it. But anyway, thank you very much. Please show up on the 9th and the 16th.